The slap echoed through the courthouse steps like thunder. The crowd gasped as the police officer struck the black woman who dared to claim she belonged here. They thought they had broken her spirit. But when she slowly raised her head, her eyes blazing with unshakable dignity, everything changed forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The alarm clock rang at 5:30 a.m., but Sarah Williams was already awake. She had been lying in bed for the past hour, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts about the day ahead. Today was not just another day. Today was the day she had been working toward for 20 long years. She got up slowly and walked to her bedroom window. The sun was just beginning to rise over Jefferson County, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. In the distance, she could see the courthouse where she would soon begin her new role as circuit judge. The first black woman to ever hold this position in the county's 150-year history. Sarah's grandmother had worked as a maid in the homes of wealthy white families. Her mother had been a school teacher, fighting every day for respect and fair treatment. Now Sarah was about to become a judge. 3 generations of women, each climbing higher than the one before. She made her coffee slowly, savoring the quiet morning ritual. Her house was small but comfortable, filled with law books and family photos. On the kitchen table sat a framed picture of her late father, a construction worker who had worked double shifts to help pay for her education. Next to it was her law school graduation photo, where she stood proudly in her cap and gown, one of only 3 black students in her graduating class. "Daddy," she whispered to the photo, "I wish you could see this day." After breakfast, Sarah stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting her navy blue suit. She had chosen this outfit carefully, professional but not flashy, authoritative but not intimidating. Her black robe was folded neatly in her briefcase, waiting for the moment when she would put it on for the first time in her new courthouse. She practiced her introduction in the mirror. "Good morning, I am Judge Sarah Williams." The words felt strange on her tongue. For years she had been Attorney Williams, Counselor Williams, Ms. Williams. But today she would be Your Honor. The drive to the courthouse took 15 minutes. As she pulled into the parking lot, Sarah noticed it was still mostly empty. Only a few cars belonged to the early morning shift workers. She had arrived intentionally early, wanting time to settle in before the busy day began. Sarah parked her car and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. She had faced difficult moments before: hostile opposing counsel, skeptical juries, judges who questioned her every move. But this felt different. This was her courthouse now, her courtroom, her responsibility. She stepped out of her car and walked toward the impressive building. The Jefferson County Courthouse was built in 1875, a grand structure with marble columns and wide stone steps. Carved above the entrance were the words, "Justice for All." Sarah had always wondered if those words applied to people like her. As she climbed the courthouse steps, her heels clicking on the stone, she felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. Each step brought her closer to a dream she had carried since law school. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice called out behind her. "The courthouse doesn't open for another hour." Sarah turned to see a security guard approaching. He was a middle-aged white man with gray hair and a permanent frown. His name tag read Dave Morrison. "I'm here early for a reason," she replied politely. "I need to prepare for court today." Dave looked her up and down with obvious suspicion. His eyes lingered on her face, her clothes, her briefcase. Sarah could see him trying to figure out why a black woman would be at the courthouse so early. "What business do you have here so early?" he asked, his tone becoming more aggressive with each word. "Are you a witness in some case? Maybe a defendant who got confused about your court time?" Sarah felt that familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had experienced this kind of questioning throughout her career, but she had hoped that at this level, in this position, things might be different. "Neither," she said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "I'm here in my professional capacity." "Professional capacity?" Dave repeated, almost laughing. "What kind of professional capacity? You some kind of social worker? Community organizer? One of those people who come here trying to cause trouble?" The assumption stung, but Sarah maintained her composure. "I'm an attorney," she said simply. Dave actually laughed out loud, a harsh sound that echoed off the marble walls of the courthouse entrance. "Sure you are, lady. Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but court staff and attorneys enter through the side entrance. This entrance is for judges and officials only. Important people." Sarah felt the insult like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. "I understand the entrance policy," she said calmly. "That's exactly why I'm using this entrance." Before Dave could respond, the courthouse doors opened from the inside. Two police officers emerged, both looking tired as if they had been working the night shift. They were talking quietly to each other, but they stopped when they noticed the interaction on the steps. "Problem here, Dave?" one of the officers asked. He was tall and thin with a mustache. His name tag read Martinez. "This woman is trying to enter through the judge's entrance," Dave explained, pointing at Sarah as if she were some kind of exhibit. "Claims she's an attorney, but you know how it is. Probably here for some hearing and got confused about which door to use. Maybe doesn't even speak English very well." The second police officer, whose name tag read Johnson, was shorter and stockier than his partner. He looked at Sarah with the same suspicious expression that Dave had worn. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, stepping closer to Sarah, "I'm going to need to see some identification. We can't have people wandering around the courthouse making false claims." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She handed over her driver's license and her bar association card, documents she had shown hundreds of times throughout her career. Martinez examined them carefully, holding them up to the morning light as if checking for forgeries. Then he handed them to Johnson, who studied them with equal suspicion. "Sarah Williams," Johnson read aloud slowly. "Says here you're an attorney, all right. But that still doesn't explain why you're trying to use the judge's entrance at 7 in the morning. What are you really doing here?" "I'm here early to prepare for my first day," Sarah explained patiently. "I have a very busy docket ahead of me, and I wanted to get familiar with the courtroom before the proceedings begin." "Your first day of what?" Martinez asked, his tone becoming sharper and more aggressive. "My first day presiding over this court." The three men exchanged glances. Sarah could see disbelief, amusement, and something that looked like anger in their faces. Dave, the security guard, actually snorted with laughter. "Lady, I've been working at this courthouse for 15 years, Dave said, his voice getting louder. "I know every judge in this building. I know their faces, their cars, their habits. You are definitely not a judge. Not here, not anywhere." "I was appointed 2 weeks ago by Governor Morrison," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady despite the growing tension she felt. "Perhaps the memo hasn't reached all the staff yet, but I assure you I am the new circuit judge." Officer Johnson stepped closer to Sarah, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running here, but impersonating a judge is a serious crime. A felony. You could go to prison for years for this kind of thing." "I'm not impersonating anyone," Sarah replied, taking a small step back but maintaining eye contact. "If you would just call the court administrator's office, or check with the governor's appointments office, you can verify." "We don't need to call anyone," Martinez interrupted, his hand moving to rest on his service weapon. "We can see exactly what's going on here. You're probably trying to case the joint, figure out security procedures, maybe planning some kind of disruption or protest." The situation was escalating quickly, and Sarah could feel the weight of years of similar encounters pressing down on her. Throughout her career she had faced skepticism and prejudice from opposing counsel, court clerks, even other judges. But she had always found a way to prove herself through her work, her knowledge, her professionalism. This was different. These men had already decided who she was and what she was capable of based solely on the color of her skin. "Gentlemen," she said, trying one more time to de-escalate the situation, "I understand your confusion and I appreciate your dedication to courthouse security. But I assure you that I belong here. Judge Hamilton's replacement was announced in the legal newspaper just last week. I am that replacement." "Judge Hamilton?" Dave's voice rose in indignation. Judge Hamilton was one of the most respected men in this county. Served honorably for 25 years. Came from one of the oldest families around here. You think they're going to replace a man like that with someone like you? The words hung in the air like poison. Someone like you. Sarah had heard those words before in different contexts in different places, but they always carried the same meaning. Someone who didn't look right. Someone who didn't fit their narrow idea of what authority should look like. Someone who didn't belong. By now, other early arrivals had begun to gather on the courthouse steps. Court clerks arriving for the morning shift, attorneys preparing for early hearings, and a few journalists who covered the legal beat regularly. They formed a loose circle around the confrontation, some watching with obvious curiosity, others with clear discomfort. Sarah noticed among the growing crowd several attorneys she had worked with over the years, people who knew her reputation and her qualifications. There was Michael Chin, a defense attorney she had faced in court dozens of times. Susan Rodriguez, a prosecutor who had always treated her with respect. Janet Peters, the senior court clerk who had called to congratulate her on her appointment. But they all stood silent, unwilling to intervene, perhaps not wanting to become involved in what was clearly becoming an ugly and potentially dangerous situation. "I think we need to take her in for questioning," Johnson said to his partner, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "At minimum, she's trespassing on government property. At worst, she's planning something criminal. Could be terrorism for all we know." "Wait," Sarah said, holding up her hands in a peaceful gesture. "You're making a serious mistake here. I am Judge Sarah Williams, appointed by Governor Morrison to the Third Circuit Court. I have my official appointment letter in my briefcase if you'd like to see it." "Sure you do," Martinez said sarcastically. "And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Look, lady, we've been more than patient with you, but this has gone far enough. You're coming with us." What happened next would be burned into the memory of everyone who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. Officer Johnson, apparently deciding that Sarah was being resistant and uncooperative, grabbed her arm roughly. "You're under arrest," he announced loudly enough for everyone on the courthouse steps to hear clearly, "for criminal trespass and impersonating a public official." Sarah tried to remain calm, but the humiliation was overwhelming. Here she was, on what should have been one of the proudest days of her entire career, being treated like a common criminal in front of her future colleagues and the courthouse staff she would be working with every day. "Officer, please," she said, her voice steady but strained, "just call Judge Hamilton's old chambers. Call the court administrator. Someone can verify my identity and my appointment. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." "Stop resisting arrest," Johnson barked, though Sarah was standing perfectly still with her hands clearly visible and offering no resistance whatsoever. The crowd was growing larger now, and several people had pulled out their cell phones. Some were recording the incident, others seemed to be calling someone, perhaps trying to get help or report what they were witnessing. That's when Officer Martinez, perhaps feeling that the situation needed to be brought under control more forcefully, raised his hand and slapped Sarah hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the morning air like a gunshot. The growing crowd gasped audibly. Some people turned away, unable to continue watching. Others covered their mouths in shock. A few began to speak up, but their voices were lost in the general murmur of disbelief. Sarah's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. Her cheek burned with pain, and she could taste blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the profound humiliation. Not just for herself but for what this moment represented about how far they still had to go. All the progress she thought had been made, all the barriers she believed had been broken down, all the respect she thought she had earned over 20 years of dedicated legal work seemed to crumble in that single violent instant. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the morning traffic seemed to have stopped. The only sounds were Sarah's own breathing and the distant chirping of birds in the courthouse lawn trees. But instead of the broken, defeated woman the officers expected to see, something extraordinary happened. Sarah Williams slowly straightened her spine. She lifted her chin with quiet dignity. And in her eyes, instead of fear or submission, there was something that commanded attention, an unshakable sense of self-worth that could not be slapped away. "Officer Martinez," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily across the silent courthouse steps, "you have just assaulted a sitting judge on the steps of her own courthouse. In front of witnesses. While wearing your uniform and representing the police department. I suspect that's not going to work out very well for your career." Martinez laughed, but the sound was forced now, uncertain. "You can drop the act, lady. Nobody here believes your crazy story." "Excuse me." A new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see an elderly man in an expensive three-piece suit hurrying up the courthouse steps, slightly out of breath. It was Harold Morrison, the court administrator, a man who had worked in this building for over 30 years and knew every detail of courthouse operations. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said with obvious relief. "Good morning. I'm sorry you had to witness this." Morrison's face was pale as he took in the scene before him. Sarah standing there with an angry red mark on her face, the two officers flanking her like prison guards, Dave the security guard standing with his arms crossed, and the crowd of onlookers watching everything with a mixture of shock and fascination. "Judge Williams," he said formally, and the title rang out clearly for everyone to hear. "I'm so terribly sorry I'm late. I was supposed to meet you here at 7 o'clock to show you to your chambers and go over today's docket. Traffic was worse than I expected." The effect of his words was immediate and dramatic. Officer Martinez took several steps back. Johnson's mouth fell open. Dave, the security guard, looked like he had seen a ghost. "Judge Williams." Martinez stammered, his voice suddenly much higher than before. "Yes," Morrison said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in courthouse administration. Judge Sarah Williams, officially appointed by Governor Morrison 2 weeks ago to fill Judge Hamilton's position. The same Judge Williams you apparently just assaulted. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could see the realization dawning on the faces around her like a sunrise. The attorneys in the crowd began to murmur among themselves, some looking ashamed, others appearing angry at what they had witnessed. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding here," Johnson said quickly, his voice cracking with nervousness. "Has there?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out an official document with the state seal clearly visible at the top. "This is my appointment letter, signed by the governor himself. This is my bar certification issued by the state Supreme Court. This is my identification. All of which I offered to show you 30 minutes ago." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered, her voice growing stronger and more commanding. More people stopped to listen as they arrived for the day's court sessions. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I want you all to witness this moment, because it represents something very important. Today was supposed to be my first day serving as your circuit judge. Instead, it has become a teaching moment about assumptions, about prejudice, and about the courage required to see past the surface of things." She looked directly at the 2 officers who were now standing with their heads down, clearly understanding the magnitude of their mistake and its potential consequences for their careers. These officers saw a black woman on the courthouse steps and immediately assumed she didn't belong here. They saw confidence and mistook it for deception. They saw dignity and interpreted it as defiance. They saw authority and assumed it was fraud. And when their assumptions were challenged with facts and documentation, they responded with violence. The crowd was growing larger by the minute. Word was spreading through the courthouse that something significant was happening on the front steps, and people were coming out to see what was going on. "But I want to tell you something else," Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the courthouse steps. "This is not just about what happened to me this morning. This is about what happens every single day to people who don't fit others' narrow expectations of what authority looks like, what competence looks like, what leadership looks like." She paused, looking around at the faces in the crowd. Some people were nodding in agreement, others looked uncomfortable with the truth she was speaking, but everyone was listening intently. "I have spent 20 years earning the right to stand on these steps as your judge. 20 years of education, experience, and unwavering dedication to the law. Law school where I was one of only 3 black students in my class. Years as a public defender, fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Years as a prosecutor, seeking justice for victims. Years in private practice, building a reputation for integrity and excellence." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "And yet, 3 men who knew nothing about my qualifications, my character, my record, or my commitment to justice decided within minutes that I was a threat to be eliminated rather than a leader to be respected." Officer Martinez finally found his voice. "Your Honor, we didn't know. We made a terrible mistake." "You made a choice," Sarah corrected him, her words precise and clear. "You chose to see threat instead of authority. You chose suspicion over inquiry. You chose assumptions over evidence. You chose violence over verification. Those were choices, Officer Martinez, not mistakes. Mistakes happen by accident. These were deliberate decisions based on prejudice." She turned back to address the court administrator. "Mr. Morrison, I believe we have important work to do today. But first, I want to make something absolutely clear to everyone here." Her voice grew even stronger, more commanding. The crowd leaned in to hear every word. "I will not let this incident define my tenure as your judge. I will not let prejudice and humiliation become the story of my career. Instead, I will let my work speak for itself. I will preside over this court with fairness, with wisdom, and with the dignity that was attacked but not broken here this morning." She looked back at the 2 officers who were both staring at the ground. "As for what happened here today, that will be dealt with through the proper channels. Internal affairs, civil rights investigations, whatever processes are appropriate. But I want you both to understand something very important." The courthouse steps were now packed with people, and Sarah's voice carried to all of them. "When you slapped me, you didn't just assault a woman. You didn't just assault a black person. You assaulted the very concept of justice that this building is supposed to represent. You assaulted every person who has ever been told they don't belong, every person who has ever been judged by their appearance rather than their achievements, every person who has ever had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word she spoke. But here's what you didn't understand and what I want everyone here to remember for the rest of their lives. You cannot slap dignity away from someone who has earned it. You cannot humiliate strength into submission. You cannot break what is built on truth and hard work and an unshakable determination to serve justice. She straightened her shoulders and looked around at all the faces watching her: court clerks, attorneys, journalists, police officers, courthouse security, and curious members of the public. So let me introduce myself properly to this community. I am Judge Sarah Williams. I am the duly appointed judge of this circuit court. And despite what you witnessed here this morning, or perhaps because of it, I am ready to begin my service to this community with dedication, fairness, and an unwavering commitment to justice for all people. Harold Morrison stepped forward, clearly moved by what he had witnessed. Your Honor, shall we proceed to your chambers? I believe you have a busy day ahead of you. Yes, Sarah said with quiet authority. I believe we have a full docket today, and justice doesn't wait for anyone. As she walked up the courthouse steps toward the entrance, the crowd parted before her like the Red Sea. But something fundamental had changed in those faces. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that looked very much like respect, and in many cases, genuine admiration. Behind her, Officers Martinez and Johnson stood frozen on the courthouse steps, both of them realizing that their careers in law enforcement had probably just come to an abrupt end. Dave, the security guard, was already on his radio, probably calling his supervisor to report the incident and try to save his own job. But Judge Sarah Williams didn't look back. She walked through the doors of the courthouse with her head held high, past the metal detectors, past the portraits of all the white male judges who had served before her, and down the long marble hallway to her new chambers. The door to her office bore a temporary nameplate that read, "The Honorable Sarah Williams, Circuit Judge." Mr. Morrison unlocked the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The office was everything she had dreamed of: spacious and dignified, with tall windows that looked out over the city, dark wood furniture that spoke of tradition and authority, and floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with law books. On the large desk sat a permanent nameplate, crystal clear and official. Your Honor, Morrison said quietly, closing the door behind them, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about what happened out there. This is absolutely not how we wanted your first day to begin, and it certainly doesn't represent the values of this courthouse or this community. Sarah set down her briefcase and looked around the office that she had dreamed of occupying for so many years. She walked to one of the tall windows and looked down at the courthouse steps, where small groups of people were still gathered, talking intensely about what they had witnessed. Mr. Morrison, she said thoughtfully, let me tell you something. What happened out there was unfortunate, and it was wrong, and it should never happen to anyone. But it was also clarifying in a way that I didn't expect. She turned back to face the court administrator. For years, I've wondered if I would truly be accepted in a position like this. I've wondered if people would be able to see past my race and my gender to judge me on my actual merits and qualifications. Today, I got a very clear answer to that question. Morrison waited for her to continue. Some people will never see past the surface no matter what I accomplish or how well I do this job. But others will. And the ones who matter most, the ones who truly care about justice and fairness and the rule of law, they'll judge me by my actions and my decisions, not by my appearance. Morrison nodded slowly. The legal community here has tremendous respect for your work and your reputation, Your Honor. Today's incident doesn't change that fact. If anything, I think the way you handled it has earned you even more respect. I hope so, Sarah said. Because this work is too important to be derailed by ignorance and prejudice. There was a soft knock on the door. Morrison opened it to find a small group of people standing in the hallway: attorneys, court clerks, and other courthouse staff. Your Honor, said Janet Peters, the senior court clerk, stepping forward to speak for the group, we wanted to come by and officially welcome you to the courthouse. We also wanted to apologize for what happened this morning. It doesn't represent who we are or what we stand for as a legal community. Behind her, several attorneys nodded in agreement. Sarah recognized many of them, prosecutors and defense attorneys she had worked with over the years, respected colleagues who had remained silent on the courthouse steps but were now ready to speak up and show their support. We should have intervened immediately, said Michael Chin, the defense attorney Sarah had known for years. We should have spoken up the moment we realized what was happening. There's no excuse for our silence and we're all ashamed of it. Sarah looked at the faces gathered in her doorway and saw genuine remorse, but also determination and respect. Thank you all for coming, she said warmly. Your support means more to me than you know. What can we do now? Asked Susan Rodriguez, the prosecutor. How can we make this right and ensure it never happens again? Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. You can do your jobs with integrity and professionalism. You can practice law with honor. You can treat everyone who enters this courthouse with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. And you can remember that justice is not about who has power, but about how that power is used to serve all people fairly. And so began the remarkable career of Judge Sarah Williams, who had transformed a moment of profound humiliation into a powerful demonstration of dignity, strength, and the unbreakable spirit of justice.